Now let's learn aggregate supply and aggregate demand in India. Following are the topics we are going to cover in this applied example module. Aggregate supply overview. In that, agriculture and allied activities, overview and recent trends. Industrial activity, overview and recent trends. Services, overview and recent trends. Aggregate supply, broad numbers. Aggregate demand, overview. Aggregate demand, broad numbers. Aggregate demand, recent trends. Till now, we have learned a very basic definition of aggregate supply and output in an economy. According to our definition, aggregate supply is summation of all goods and services produced in the economy. To bring more contextual value to this definition in Indian economy, let's see how we measure overall aggregate supply in the economy. Broadly, aggregate supply of all the markets is measured in three categories. That is, agriculture and allied activities. It weighs about 10 to 15% in total economy. Industry weighs about 25 to 30% in the economy. And services, it weighs about 55 to 60% in the total economy. Let's delve deeper into each of these categories to understand the supply side of Indian economy. Agriculture and allied activities. It measures the output produced by farmers across the country. The output generally consists of items like wheat, pulses, oilseeds, rice, sugar, and related items which are produced by farmers across the country. India is an agrarian country with more than 60% of the population depending on agriculture for their livelihood. The country produces innumerable crops ranging from medicinal to cereal crops. These commodities are used for various purposes from human consumption to industries to animal feed. The crops are produced under irrigated, partially irrigated and rain-fed conditions. The crops are broadly divided into two categories, namely Kharif and Rabi crops. The Kharif season starts from June and ends in September. The Rabi season is during October to February. The crops that are sown in the rainy season are called Kharif crops. The Kharif season is during the southwest monsoon, that is July to October. During this season, agricultural activities take place both in rain-fed areas and irrigated areas. The chief Kharif crops are bajra and jowar, paddy, that is rice, maize, pulses, groundnut, red chilies, cotton, soya bean, sugarcane, and turmeric. The crops that are sown in the winter season are called Rabi crops. Rabi crops are generally sown between October to February and harvested by June. Most important Rabi crop is wheat, and other crops are barley, gram, pulses, linseed, and mustard. Let's have a look at the recent trends. Despite a steady decline in the share of agriculture and allied activities in GDP to about 14.6%, it continues to be the mainstay of majority of the population, of about 52% of the workforce, and remains critical from the point of view of achieving the objectives of food security and price stability. Indian agrarian economy is highly food price inflation sensitive. An erratic shortfall in domestic production owing to monsoon's unpredictability, bottlenecks in supply chain of food grains from farms to households, and high international prices have made the food prices generally high and erratic in the last few years. Considering that the food grain prices immediately affect the lower and middle income groups, which constitute 80% of our population, the price control has been perennially in the task list of the government for the last few years. Higher investment backed by sustained research and extension activities could be critical for augmenting yield. Moreover, the consumption basket is getting diversified more in favor of allied products like milk, vegetables, fruits, meat, poultry, fish, etc., which are important from the nutritional angle. Hence, it is also equally important to gradually move away from the cereal-centric policy towards these items with supportive policy framework and the required infrastructure. Market infrastructure is important for the performance of various marketing functions and for transmitting price signals for efficient resource allocation. The policy efforts need to be geared towards a reduction in wastage of produce that occurs during storage and management of supply chains. Industrial activity. Total industrial production in an economy would consist of units of cars produced, number of meters of clothes produced, number of tons of coal produced, etc., right? In order to compare across industries and also to arrive at individual or overall growth number, one has to get them to the same base. This is done through measuring the value, that is, number of units produced per industry multiplied with price per unit per industry. There is one index that does exactly this, and that is called Index of Industrial Production, that is IIP. This is an important index and measures how different sectors are growing and how overall industry is growing. Not just the government publishes these numbers periodically. The government and industry folks use this to gauge industry trends. There are two ways to measure IIP. Measuring IIP based on industrial output per sector categories and measuring IIP based on the usage. To measure IIP based on industrial output per sector categories, following classification is referred with corresponding weightages. Total industrial output IIP is 538 items, which is 100%. Individual items are A plus B plus C, which is equal to 538. The A is manufacturing, which weighs about 79.36% in total industrial output. B is mining and quarrying, which weighs about 10.47%, and the C is electricity, which weighs about 10.17%. To measure IIP based on usage per sector categories, following classification is referred with corresponding weightages. Total industrial output IIP is 538 items, which is 100%. Individual items are A plus B plus C plus D, which is equal to 538 items. The A, basic goods, which weighs about 35.57% in total industrial output. B, capital goods, which weighs about 9.26%. C, intermediate goods, weighs about 26.51%. And the D, consumer goods, which weighs about 28.66%. And it can be further classified into subcategories: consumer durables and consumer non-durables with their respective weightages as 5.36% and 23.30%. Now let's learn each category with little details. Basic good. Basic goods are the materials which are important and of key nature to the industry, on which the manufacturing process is based, vis-a-vis metal for machine, leather for shoe, textile for clothes. Such material is not lost through the process of production, but only changes its forms. Capital good. Individuals, organizations, and governments use capital goods in the production of other goods or commodities. Capital goods include factories, machinery, tools, equipment, and various buildings which are used to produce other products for consumption. Capital goods, then, are products which are not produced for immediate consumption. Rather, they are objects that are used to produce other goods and services. Dump trucks, however, are usually considered capital goods because they are used by construction and manufacturing companies to haul various materials in order to make other products such as roads, bridges, dams, and buildings. Similarly, a chocolate candy bar is a consumer good, but the machines used to produce the chocolate candy bar are considered capital goods. Intermediate good. Intermediate goods or producer goods are goods used as inputs in the production of other goods, such as partly finished goods. Also, they are goods used in production of final goods. A firm may make them use intermediate goods or make them sell or buy, then use them. In the production process, intermediate goods either become part of the final product or are changed beyond recognition in the process. Intermediate product is a product which is obtained during a manufacturing process which may or may not be saleable and is not the intended final product. Examples are steel, a raw material used in the production of many other goods such as bicycles. Car engines. Some firms make and use their own. Others buy them from other producers as an intermediate good, then use them in their own car. Paint, plywood, pipe and tube, ancillary parts, etc. Consumer goods. The goods used by the consumer to fulfill their needs. It is further subdivided into two categories based on the usage period: consumer durables and consumer non-durables. Consumer durables. In economics, a durable good or a hard good is a good that does not quickly wear out, or more specifically, one that yields utility over time rather than being completely consumed in one use. Items like bricks or jewelry could be considered perfectly durable goods because they should theoretically never wear out. Highly durable goods such as refrigerators, cars, or mobile phones usually continue to be useful for 3 or more years of use, so durable goods are typically characterized by long periods between successive purchases. Examples of consumer durable goods include household goods, that is, home appliances, consumer electronics, furniture, etc., sports equipment, and toys. Consumer non-durables. Non-durable goods or soft goods, that is, consumables, are the opposite of durable goods. They may be defined either as goods that are immediately consumed in one use or ones that have a lifespan of less than 3 years. Examples of non-durable goods include fast-moving consumer goods such as cosmetics, cleaning products, food, fuel, office supplies, packaging and containers, paper and paper products, personal products, rubber, plastics, textiles, clothing, and footwear. Let's have a look at the recent trends. First, trends from industry point of view. The recovery was broad-based with high growth in manufacturing industries, that is 10.9%, followed by mining 9.9% and electricity 6%. The manufacturing output growth rate was supported by increases in consumer durables, capital goods, and intermediate goods production. The strong performance of the manufacturing sector during the second half of 2009-2010 could partly be attributed to the base effect. Despite the large increase in the production of natural gas, iron ore, and other minerals, growth in the mining sector remained at less than 10% due to continued slack in crude oil and coal output. The electricity sector also lagged behind, owing to lower hydel power generation in view of weak monsoon conditions and the low level of reservoir capacity. Similarly, inadequate coal production and delayed imports adversely affected the coal availability, leading to lower thermal generation. Trends from usage point of view. The pace of recovery in industrial production during 2009-2010 is evident from the fact that the IIP almost reached the level which would have been achieved had the high growth phase of 2005-2007 not been interrupted in the subsequent 2 years on account of the global crisis. While the output of consumer durables, that is 26.2%, and capital goods industries, that is 19.2%, gained strength during 2009-2010, recovery in the growth of non-durables, that is 1.3%, was held back due to sluggishness in private consumption demand. The growth in the capital goods segment was aided by the rapid rise in output of several industries like broad gauge covered wagons, commercial vehicles, printing machinery, and air and gas compressors. This can be attributed to the higher allocation for the infrastructure sector by the government, thereby facilitating crowding in of private investment in machinery and construction sectors and contributing to higher gross fixed capital formation in the economy. The growth of basic goods industries, that is 7.2%, supported the recovery momentum, despite some concerns that it may be difficult to sustain the growth in the wake of capacity constraints in some industries. The recovery in the intermediate goods segment, that is 13.6%, was initially driven by the turnaround in inventory cycle, followed by a strong recovery in investment demand. Weak external demand notwithstanding, the pickup in exports and moderation in government expenditure on account of the fiscal exit could moderate industrial growth. Revival in private consumption demand, therefore, would be critical for sustaining the recent performance of the industrial sector. Improvement in the southwest monsoon performance during June-July 2010, better agricultural production prospects, change in income tax slabs in 2010-2011, and the permanent effect of the implementation of the 6th Pay Commission recommendations on income should be supportive of consumption demand. Services. Measures the services rendered by various service providers in the country. The output generally consists items like trade, hotels and restaurants, transport, storage and communications, financing, insurance, real estate, community, social and personal services, construction. The percentage share of this category in total output is close to 55 to 60%. So, services could cover all of coffee produced by nearest coffee shop, holidays offered by some hotels and resorts, food served by hotels, transport services provided by travel agencies, aviation services, that is cargo, provided by transport companies, 2G, 3G, internet services provided by telecom providers, entertainment services provided by media, construction services provided by real estate companies, mutual funds, saving accounts, credit cards, loans, etc. services provided by banks and other finance companies, IT and BPO services provided by multinational companies, accounting, auditing, financial research, engineering research services provided by managers and engineers of KPOs, police, defense and other public services provided by government, construction services like housing, commercial premises, educational institutions and recreational facilities, sports services like Commonwealth Games, World Cup, IPL provided by government agencies, roads, highways, primary education and healthcare services provided by the government. Let's see the growth in each of these categories over a period of last 5 years to get a good feel of which category is contributing to the growth of output. The services sector had exhibited significant resilience to the contagion from the global crisis. Services dependent on external demand, such as tourist arrivals, cargo handled at major ports, and passengers handled at international terminals, recovered during 2009-2010, although remained below the pre-crisis levels. The two fast-growing broad services categories are financing, insurance, real estate and business services, and transport, storage and communication. The latter overtook the former in 2009-2010 with a high growth of 15%. A third category, a growth of trade, hotels and restaurants, slowed in 2008-2009 and has recovered moderately in 2009 and 2010. The fourth category, community, social and personal services, saw a sudden jump in 2008-2009 to overtake the growth of all other categories, reflecting the high growth in public administration and defense. This category has continued to grow rapidly in 2009-2010, despite a slowdown in growth in public administration and defense. The commitment for pay arrears under the new revised scale for government employees coming down, due to the offsetting rise in growth of other services, reflecting the fiscal stimulus to social sector activities. Among other services, the two important ones in terms of share of GDP are education and medical health, with the former growing at 13.9% and the latter at 5.3% in 2009-2010. All other services are of minor importance in India's GDP. Among the subcategories in 2008-2009, double-digit growth was registered by communication, that is 25.8%, public administration and defense 20.2%, banking and insurance 14%, and storage 10.5%. Negative growth was registered only by hotels and restaurants to the extent of minus 3.1%. Among business services, the two important categories are computer-related services and the category consisting of many services like other services, market research, business and management consultancy, architectural engineering, and advertising, with shares of 3.26% and 0.88% respectively in the GDP. While computer-related services, which grew by 21.2% in 2008-2009, registered a moderate growth of 5.2% in 2009-2010 due to the global crisis. Other services registered good growth of 19.6% and 19.9% in 2008-2009 and 2009-2010 respectively. Hope now you have clear understanding of overall aggregate supply of goods and services in Indian economy. Let's summarize by key table and graph which will give you complete picture of supply of goods and services in an economy in one place. Till now, we have learned that aggregate demand in an economy is a summation of consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports. Let's have a look on Indian economy aggregate demand equation to find the practical application of concept that we have learned. In Indian economy, aggregate demand consists of private final consumption expenditure. Contribution to demand is 58.5%. Government final consumption expenditure. Contribution to demand is 11.6%. Gross capital formation. Contribution to demand is 37.7%, and this is divided into three subcategories: A plus B plus C. They are: A. Gross fixed capital formation. Contribution to demand is 32%. B. Change in inventory or stocks. Contribution to demand is 3.5%. C. Valuables. Contribution to demand is 2.2%. Net exports. Contribution to demand is minus 5.6%, and this is divided into two subcategories: A minus B. They are: exports. Contribution to demand is 21.9%. Imports. Contribution to demand is minus 27.5%. Some alien names, but broadly they carry exactly the same meaning what we have learned in the theory. Let's see each one by looking at the definition of them provided by National Account Statistics. Private final consumption expenditure. The household consumption expenditure, referred to as Private Final Consumption Expenditure (PFCE) in National Accounts Statistics, consists of expenditure by households, including non-profit institutions, on non-durable consumer goods and services, and all durable goods except land and buildings. The durable goods are defined as those whose lifetime are more than 1 year and consist of items such as furniture, radios, televisions, automobiles, etc. Purchase and construction of residential buildings are not treated as consumption expenditure of the households, but are included in the gross capital formation. In the case of owner-occupied buildings, the imputed rent is included in the final consumption expenditure. The total contribution of private final consumption expenditure in total expenditure in Indian economy is around 25 to 30 lakh crores in the last few years, which forms around 58.5% of total expenditures. Government final consumption expenditure. As we have seen in the theory, the role of the government in the economy is essentially different from that of enterprises and households. To cite a few examples, the government offers services both to entrepreneurs and consumers, and in most cases, it receives no payment for that, or even if it does, the same is likely to bear little or no relation to the value of the services to the user. In the course of organizing collective services such as defense, justice, primary health and education, government purchases the services of its officials and also many non-durable goods and other services from other suppliers. Since these services are rendered free, these do not appear in the household consumer expenditure. These services are not only of economic value, but also create real final consumption value to the people. It is therefore necessary to reckon them in the national expenditure. Since these collective services are not sold, they can be valued in money terms only by adding up the money spent by the government in buying these services of teachers, doctors, public administrative employees, the armed forces, etc., together with the goods and other materials purchased. This total is the consumption expenditure of the government, and it consists of purchase of non-durable goods and services by the government. The total contribution of government final consumption expenditure in total expenditure in Indian economy is around 4 to 6 lakh crore rupees in the last few years, which forms around 11.6% of total expenditure in the economy. Gross capital formation. Gross capital formation consists of the acquisition of fixed assets and the accumulation of stocks. Fixed assets are physical productive assets, examples of which are building, civil works, machinery, vehicles, etc. The stock accumulation is in the form of changes in stock of raw materials, fuels, finished goods, and semi-finished goods awaiting completion. Thus, gross capital formation is that part of the country's total expenditure which is not consumed but added to the nation's fixed tangible assets and stocks. The total contribution of gross capital formation is investment in total expenditure in Indian economy is around 17 to 21 lakh crore rupees in the last few years, which forms around 32% of total expenditure in the economy. Net exports. NX is exports minus imports. Imports are same and it forms around minus 7.2%. That is, exports 20.2% and imports of 27.4% of total expenditure of the economy. Note, there is another element in real world, that is discrepancy, which contributes close to 0.3% of total expenditure. Let's now sum all of them to see whether it is 100% or not. C, that is consumption in our equation. Private final consumption expenditure PFCE is 58.5%. G, that is government expenditure in our equation. Government final consumption expenditure GFCE is 11.6%. I, that is private investment. Gross capital formation GCF is 37.4%. NX, that is exports minus imports, which is equal to minus 7.2%. Discrepancy 0.3%. If you sum C plus I plus G, it will be 58.5 plus 11.6 plus 37.4 totals to 107.5%. But if you add net exports minus 7.2% and discrepancy minus 0.3%, that is minus 7.2% plus minus 0.3% totals to minus 7.5%. The total is 100%, that is 107.5% minus 7.5% comes out to 100%. Let's now summarize the discussion. Just go back to your memories of 2008, precisely September, or ask your any friend or family member the news of Lehman Brothers bankruptcy and downfall of US financial sector came as a tsunami to all of us. The news of this magnitude means gloominess in the mind of consumer about the future of Indian IT companies and other companies which export goods and services to USA and private banks or financial institutions of our own country. Also, because of liquidity crunch in the global financial market, the immediate impact was on the stock market, as investors from around the world have started withdrawing their money, and also on the firm's future projects and employment plans. In this uncertain scenario, the only option left with consumer is to save cash and delay their consumption decision, which finally resulted in fall in aggregate demand. Whether it was a plan to buy TV, fridge, bike, car, expensive clothes, or outing for holidays, or any other spending decision, everywhere spending became less from the consumers. As a result of which, the drivers of aggregate demand changed significantly during 2008-2009 and 2009-2010. The growth in private final consumption expenditure moderated from 8% in the first half of 2008-2009 to 5.8% in the second half and further to 4.6% in the first half of 2009-2010, reflecting economic slowdown, poor agriculture production, and high food prices. Also, the news of this magnitude about changing consumer decisions combined with Rising cost of funds means gloominess in the mind of firms about the future of economy and hence their future, as a result of which they delayed their investment decisions in building factories, buying machines, setting up offices, etc., which finally resulted in the fall in aggregate demand. The rate of increase in gross fixed capital formation fell from 6.9% in the first half of 2008-2009 to 1.3% in second half and further to 0.5% in the first half of 2009-2010. Because of general gloominess among firms and households in the rest of the world, especially US and Europe, which are major export countries for India, the demand for exports went down, as a result of which net export has decreased significantly. As we know, when firms and households become pessimistic about economy health, they delay their consumption and investment respectively, as a result of which economy enters into downward spiral. As suggested by Dr. Means, when economy is in downward spiral or affected by pessimism of firms and households, government has to take charge of pushing aggregate demand by increasing its expenditure in public project or by reducing taxes for firms and households. If we notice the graph, we can easily see that Indian government has done the same in the time of crisis. Fiscal measures were initiated to offset the slack in private demand. Consequently, the growth in government final consumption expenditure increased significantly from 5.5% in the first half of 2008-2009 to whooping 25.7% in the second half of 2008-2009 and 22.5% in first half of 2009-2010, reflecting the expansionary fiscal response to the crisis.